Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can find and subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our site, vmspod.com, to find more information, as well as our RSS feed, which you can plug into any podcatcher so you never miss an episode of the Virtual Memories Show. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube, where I go by vmspod, and subscribe to my semi-weekly newsletter at buttondown.com/vmspod. Well, I am in Boston for a big biotech trade show at present. It is my last one for a couple of months, started yesterday. It's the end of trade show season in mid-June, though I still have a bunch of Washington area visits for work this summer, but all part of the job. But something weird happened yesterday. Like, among all the schmoozing and the business pitches and putting on the Gil show for all these people, I bumped into a pal. They're all pals of mine, but I bumped into this guy I've known for like a decade or so. German guy, or Austrian, or maybe Swiss German. I don't know, but I'm going to go with German. He went to University of Cologne when I looked up his bio earlier, but German enough. And he always has this jovial, friendly demeanor. This sort of big, broad face, smiling guy, tall guy, a little taller than me. So we cross paths. You know, he's walking past a aisle when I'm just leaving a company's booth. And I said, "How goes it?" And he smilingly said, "Terrible. We need to talk." And I thought he was goofing, you know, just throwing that out there. But as it turned out, he was serious. See, he had this business setback at his company, and they seemed intent on forcing him out. When he told me the details of the setback, we both agreed this was a really BS thing to shiv him over. Basically, it's he lost a proposal for a project he never could have won, and I won't bother going into details about it, but anyway, we talked about next steps. He wanted my feedback on a couple of things he was considering. And I'm 54. He's a couple of years older than me, and sort of trying to figure out what he should do as he heads towards retirement. Now, none of this is exactly the weird part, but, you know, as we kind of moved through that, all the professional stuff, he said to me, with this smile on his face and this sort of, you know, friendly expression, that he was facing a lot of strain in his professional, personal, social, and family lives, as it were. Although he took pains to tell me his marriage is doing just fine, but everything is tough right now. And I wanted to tell him, you know, join the club. But, you know, I held back and I let him open up about all this. And we're standing there in the middle of a huge conference hall with people coming and going, and we're just talking there, standing in our suits. And he just started opening up about this stuff in generalities, didn't go too specific beyond like the work stuff. But, yeah. We started talking about that, and I started sharing some of my own, again, in generalities, strains and stresses. And I use that language because I tend to conceptualize that stuff as a pulling. The strain is literally a sort of tearing apart at the seams. It's not literal. Figuratively, it's how I conceive it. For him, he described this stuff as a stool with three legs, that personal, professional, and social, I guess. And where maybe if one leg goes out, you can still manage to balance on the remaining two. But when all three are compromised, you know, it's your ass. And so we started walking from there because he had a meeting to get to, and we talked about mental health. And I talked about how, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Europe or for his particular culture, but, in America, for men, it's very difficult to talk about this sort of stuff and to get into how we're feeling, not just what's wrong, but how it's affecting us. And, I brought up therapy. I've never done it, but I have had a lot of help from a couple of friends in recent months that's kind of enabled me to better understand some of the patterns I fall into and better relate to myself, not necessarily to some of the outside factors, but at least better understand, how I should behave or how I should respond, whatever. I will note that I recently wrote a note to myself that read, "I self-scrutinize so much I barely know myself," which seems witty, but, I really have made some progress, even if the present moment is pretty fraught. Anyway, he asked me to come by his company's stand today, so, maybe we'll keep talking about some of that stuff and not just the professional lives. But it was, felt weirdly good, not just having that conversation, but being trusted by someone who, we have talked a little about our lives and he knows about my health stuff and all that. But, having that in the middle of all of the federal policy and business and all the other stuff I discussed was, that was something. None of which has anything to do with this week's show, but I wanted to share that with you. But now we should get to the podcast itself. My guest this time is Kate Maruyama, who is one of my favorite people I've gotten to meet through making the podcast. Kate's got a new novel out now from Running Wild Press called Alterations, and it's an absolute joy. Kate is known for her horror fiction, and we got together on Saturday at StokerCon, this horror festival that was being held in Stamford, Connecticut. But Alterations is what we'll call a non-genre book. I hate saying literary fiction because we get into the whole ghettoization of genres and stuff in the conversation pretty late. But this one essentially has no horror elements, although there is a sort of ghost lingering above it all. The book Alterations really leans on Kate's love of old Hollywood, her 1990s experience working in movie production in Hollywood, and her deep understanding of family dynamics and intergenerational tension and trauma. See, Alterations starts out as the story of a teenager named Lizzie whose parents die in a car crash. And she winds up having to live in Baltimore with her great-grandmother, Adriana, whose own story starts to unfold to the reader through flashbacks. The story is told through first-person Lizzie, third person of Adriana / Nonna, the great-grandmother, and a third character. The third character being Lizzie's older cousin, Laura, who also has a life meltdown and moves in with the two of them. And Kate does this amazing job of showing us how these three women interact and try and fail to connect at times and are weighed down with their own baggage, with no idea how to ask someone to help with the burden, which I guess maybe is part of why I thought of that episode from earlier at the trade show. But anyway, for Laura, the third person, we see third person flashbacks of her life collapsing in LA and how that sort of informs her stabs at starting something new in Baltimore. And for Lizzie, the trauma of her loss and the uprootedness she faces in a new city almost consumes her, and we see her straining and struggling as a teenager trying to rebuild or make something of her life. But it's Adriana's story, which is all these flashbacks to her trying to make a go of it in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s, becoming a costume designer under Edith Head, and Kate brings a wealth of stories into costume design and what Hollywood was like back then. But also Adriana finding the love of her life in another woman and then having to decide, whether to keep her career or keep love, and how that informs her. And that story hovers above all the others. And we see how it sets the patterns that'll govern each of her descendants' lives as we start to learn more about the family and who these people are, how they got that way. Alterations is a beautiful novel about family, love, loss, the illusion of Hollywood, and the storytelling that helps us make sense of our lives. I'd go on and on about it, but I do have to get back to the trade show, so trust me. Alterations is a wonderful novel, and as I mentioned during the conversation, there were a couple of points that legit nearly made me cry, which is no easy feat and should be enough of an endorsement that you guys get why this is a good novel to read. So go get it. It's Alterations by Kate Maruyama from Running Wild Press. Now, as caveats go, the actress whose name I blank on from Home for the Holidays and The Player is Cynthia Stevenson. And the essay that Kate mentions, that she blanks on the title of, is The Stories We Tell Ourselves, The Power of Narrative and Community Amid Chaos. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this one. Now, here's Kate's bio. Kate Maruyama is the author of Harrogate, Bleak Houses, and The Collective. Her novella, Family Solstice, was named Best Fiction Book of 2021 by Rue Morgue magazine. Her short work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, and she is a 2-time Pushcart Prize nominee and winner of the Uncharted Short Story Prize. She served on the Working Board for Women Who Submit and the board for the Shirley Jackson Awards. She writes, teaches, cooks, and eats in Los Angeles. Her new novel is Alterations. And now, the 2025 Virtual Memories Conversation with Kate Maruyama. Alterations.
Yes.
Where did it begin?
Good question.
Easy one to start with.
Yeah, that's really easy. I had a short story that I was writing as a series. I was going to do a series of short stories set in a mall because I had one set in Supercuts. And one that I set in a Blockbuster had actually a boy and his grandmother watching movies together. That was sitting in a corner. But I was in Toni Ann Johnson's Breakfast Nook. She is a very dear friend. She's also a Flannery O'Connor award-winning short story writer. But we have shared work and edited each other's work. And I was noodling about what to write after Harrogate, which was my first published novel. And she said, you absolutely adore old movies. Why are you not writing about that? And I was like, oh. My father, I grew up on Wesleyan University campus, and before there was VHS, which dates me, my father had founded the film department at Wesleyan with John Fraser, and he would get movies for his classes on 16 millimeter, and we had a 16 millimeter projector. So I grew up watching the very silver screen because it was mostly black and whites. Yeah. And absolutely fell in love with the Astaire Rogers movies. Barbara Stanwyck was a huge favorite. Cary Grant was a huge favorite. So I decided that it would be, good to... I didn't know what I was going to write, but I got out Barbara Stanwyck's biography. I got out Cary Grant's biography, and I also... When I was 15, I was going to be a costume designer, so I was a huge fan of Edith Head. Mm-hmm. So I got out I just sort of reveled in what it was that I liked. And Grant's biography was a surprise to me because I did not know that he had a very steady boyfriend, Randolph Scott, for 7 years. It's very commonly known now, but at the time I was doing the research, it was a surprise. I remember when it was
more of a revelation. Yeah.
It was, and they functioned like any couple does. They lived together. There was a beautiful, I think, photo play or a magazine spread of the bachelor home they lived in. And if you look at it, it's...
A girl in every port.
Right, exactly. It was very much a steady couple in a charming home, absolutely thriving. And so reading that and sort of how they fell apart, it was a period in which it was not okay to be gay. The studio at first got Cary Grant a wife, and Randy went on their honeymoon, and then Randy moved in with them. So there was just no question that, and I love that Randy was just, I think he was open and just like no nonsense about it. No, I live with this man. And they went on for several years, and they broke up. Apparently, there are many stories around it. I'm certain there were other things in the relationship. But they were on a shoot and in Palm Desert, and they both came out of the same room in the morning, and apparently that was just one thing too many for whoever ratted them out. But the studio said to him, look, it's him or your career. And so it was very sad to me, and it was also very sad that, I think he pretty much was bi. He had one wife who took him to LSD treatments to get the queer out of him. Yeah. So anyway, I had started writing after reading the Stanwyck, and I found a character, Adriana. I found her whole background, and she met Rose, and I loved Rose. And then after I read that, I was like, oh, Rose is more than just this charming person who has come along in this book. And that's where their story came from, their love story.
Of the characters who were in it, the flashback scenes to their relationship were the most I'm about to cry reading moment. So it's rare that a book elicits that from me, because I'm a soulless, heartless monster, as you know. But there were instances where I just was like, and it might be because it just finished the Pee-wee as himself documentary on Max.
Yes, that was amazing. Yeah.
He chooses to go back in the closet back in the 70s to advance his career, or to have a career, as he put it.
And he kind of lost himself in that, too. That was a remarkable documentary.
Oh, yeah. That sense of a person who... Exactly, the sacrifices someone has to make to find the career they want.
And at the time, he was trying to be a serious actor, so that it definitely was... I think once he became the comic person, it could have gone differently. But that was really interesting.
We think that, but there is that hindsight aspect, as opposed to we remember what it was like growing up, especially in this Northeast area in the 80s. And
my brother was in college with Jodie Foster, and he was always very frustrated that she was not out because she was out in college. But I completely understand a woman wanting to be a filmmaker, that you cannot have that one extra thing against you. And she got the role she got. It's another piece of this is that my mother's great aunt Ruth, so my lived with the love of her life, Mary, in Jacksonville, Florida, in the 20s and 30s, in a family that I just happen to know personally would be totally against that, very conservative, not politics, but conservative about social mores. And my grandfather would go over and do yard work and things like that. And so it's sort of the hidden relationships. And obviously Mary and my grandmother had not a happier ending. Obviously, Mary passed. That must have stunk. But they were together for always. And that really intrigues me, that sort of flying in the face of whatever anybody is, just going on straight ahead, just as, Randolph Scott was like, I'm continuing as I have always. Why should I, hide things? I really found that really interesting.
I had one of my client member companies, we were doing this long negotiation with FDA, so we'd spend all these hours together traveling back and forth. She's a very butch, older woman who had come out in her later days, but I asked her, when she mentioned her partner, whether they were ever planning to get hitched or not. And she said, actually, we're planning next year. We're having the wedding in Boston. We figured,
Boston marriage.
Yeah, it was a Boston marriage all these years. We would actually go ahead and have a Boston wedding.
Oh, I love that.
It was... Again, people who, and it's something that comes up throughout the book, that sense of who one is and who one has to pretend to be, which isn't solely limited to Adriana, but when we see the intergenerational trauma and the way it keeps inflicting itself through the generations, it's it's a non-genre horror story in some respects.
It was very funny because I said, this is my first published non-horror novel. And someone said, no, because homophobia is horror, and yeah. And also the idea, a lot of sort of writing Nonna and then writing Adriana came from the fact that I've seen how older people are treated and how they're thought of as invisible. And my husband's grandmothers, who I totally appropriated, were amazing. He had one grandmother who had a very faint voice, and she was very petite. And so people would treat her like an old lady. And she had lived lifetimes and had the most amazing stories. And she had some stuff that, she had carried a while. And so with Adriana, I was like, so if you are told this is not your life and you're pulled out of that life for a couple of reasons, she was not allowed to be married and still working. I think her personality she has her own sort of like journey, and she's completely underestimated because she's in a really rough place when she's older and she's blue, but that is read as being a boring old lady by her granddaughter and her great-granddaughter. Yeah.
So writing non-genre? Officially non-genre for your first published non-genre work. How different is it for you, I guess, than writing?
It's kind of the same.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's funny. I did not know that Harrogate was a genre book. I thought I was writing a love story. One of them's dead, and there's a demon doula. It's a love story.
As one does, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll start something not because I did start The Collective, which is a horror novel that came out the same month as Alterations because life. Sitting down and saying, I am writing a horror novel, but for the most part, I usually start with character. I did write a portrait of a marriage told through the lens of Alzheimer's and memory that I thought was going to be genre, but the book told me otherwise. Yeah. So it's not completely different. I really adore genre and the places it takes me, but it's usually that I'm trying to ask sort of a question and I'm getting at it that leads me into a book, and then the book tells me what it is. Mm-hmm. So
you did mention Jodie Foster earlier, and I do have to cite the fact that you have a Thanksgiving scene set in Baltimore, which my wife and I are huge home for the holidays marks, so I wasn't sure.
Gosh.
And there's also a ambiguous gay misunderstanding plot line that runs throughout the
I really love that movie.
Yeah, every year around Thanksgiving we would watch it just as preparation back when we had to deal with family. Now we don't, so it's
which is way better. Yeah. I think pandemic freed a lot of people from those family Thanksgivings. It was like, wow, our Thanksgiving was so much better the year we were in lockdown.
Well, anyway. We always had a Thanksgiving of misfit toys. Like my old man and his partner would come, but we would always have the people who didn't have someone to hang with or family nearby attend, and it could get exceedingly strange when you do that, especially because Dad and his partner are relatively straight-laced, and I would start bringing some of my arts friends in, and Amy had a great pal from work and his husband, and it would just create a very different dynamic than,
Oh, yeah.
So never in the, fights way, more in the, I wonder who's going to bond with whom over the course of these conversations. And, now we're in the much more low-key, just an old friend from college comes to visit. So that's...
Thanksgiving felt like a really good... place to have things come out with this sort of cobbled together family that came together by accident. So for listeners, Lizzie has lost both of her parents, and the only grown-up that she could get sent to was her great-grandmother, who is at a rough point in her life, and also her cousin, her mother's cousin, Laura, comes back to stay at the same time. And I was a bit tired of the tropes where family moves in together and is all lovely and finds themselves. Yeah. And it's like, no, moving in with grandmas, you're moving in with a whole ass person who is dealing with their own things, and they may not be fully equipped to take care of a kid. So the cobbled together family grows a little larger with some friends, and Thanksgiving felt like a good place to sort of bring them all together to bring things to a crux.
I was very happy never to see a pat moment of that in the book. There was never, now we all understand each other.
Yeah.
Thing. There's tensions, miscommunication, and it felt sort of real to me, especially in terms of what different generations mean to each other and the impatience people have towards each other. And I will say, while you are essentially non-genre, there is the one ghost moment. That does
ghosts creep into everything. I just I've been writing science fiction, which seems to be my realism now, because short fiction that is non-genre does not pay. So all of my short stuff ends up being genre. But I have a series of stories, one sold to Analog and one to, actually two to Analog now, hooray, and one to Asimov's, but the one that I'm doing now, a ghost crept in, and I was like, you can't do anything about ghosts. They are there sometimes.
And you say science fiction is the form you're falling into?
No, it's actually just one of the forms I'm writing in. I'm also working on a horror novel. I just, it's whatever form the story takes.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't help my career. It'd be great if I could really be gung-ho in one genre, because then you sort of build a readership and things like that. But I have to write what interests me.
Yeah. I did just get a pitch from some publicist for a YA myth fantasy series. I'm like, I appreciate what you're doing, but this really isn't the venue exactly for that author. I'm chances are anybody listening to this is not going to be YA particularly, and not that I've ever done a big demographic search of my show, but I for the people who write afterwards,
no, I don't think so. Yeah.
Not exactly my world, but do you have that sort of epic George R. R. Martin vibe either in your
No,
sense?
I'm not. No,
I never got that
fantasy.
impression.
I admire it. I enjoy it, but it's not something I think I'm necessarily capable of. So, the science fiction tends to be realism, and the horror is just where I go a lot. And the realism just happens once in a while, but I try not to dedicate too much to, the shorts in that form.
Understood. How do you feel about seeing alterations?
Oh, God, that was very emotional. So the thing is, I wrote this right after Harrogate. Mm-hmm. And in 2013, I had an agent who went out with it, but 2013, the responses were all over the place. Mm-hmm. So usually the responses tell you what it is about the book that's not marketable. And he said, I can't put my finger on it. He said, but I think it's probably homophobia. Either that or the fact that shelves were so separated then that they're like, well, it's not fully an LGBTQI story, so it can't fully go on that shelf. And I don't know, did they think it's a straight story? I don't know. With big publishing and marketing, my first novel, an editor at Random House really loved, took it into the committee, and they said, and I think I had mentioned this in the prior podcast, this is a book about a man by a woman. Who is this book for? So it's it's an odd world publishing. Yeah. So, but the one thing was, so we got enough passes to sort of put it down for a while. But my friend who had helped me initiate the book, and who had also, Tony Ann Johnson, who had done 2 drafts of notes for me, she said, I'm sorry, I can't stop thinking about Adriana and Rose. You need to keep submitting this. Mm-hmm. And I would just be like, I've done another round and it's just not. And she's like, no, they're going to be out in the world. And she said, I visualize myself at your launch. She was saying this in 2016. Yeah. And so when I got the note, and so I was submitting to small presses that I admired, and Running Wild is a press in California. But at that time, when the acceptance came in, I had submitted so many places. I was like, holy cow, what is this place? I put my phone down for 3 hours. I did not believe it, because this book is my heart. I love it so very much, and I spent so much time on it, and there's just so much love in it. And it was the first time that I called someone else, not my husband. I usually tell him the news first, but I called Tony Ann, and she was doing a one-woman play of a short story of hers up in Carmel. Mm-hmm. And she and I just both started crying. Nice. And I'm not a big weeper. And it was a huge moment. So seeing it out in the world was huge. And yes, we did have at Chevalier's Books in Los Angeles, Tony Ann Johnson interviewed me for the launch of this book, just like she visualized. We went out to dinner before, and it was an incredible moment. So yeah, I'm really, really happy it's out there, and I'm happy it's finding readers. And a lot of people are, telling me that I made them cry.
Even again, soulless, heartless monsters like me.
Yeah. I'm really happy it's out there. This has been, and I as far as like promoting, I'm just going to keep plugging it forever. I'm finding different spaces, and it's now in conversation with a lot of books about Los Angeles history. So, I'm doing an event next month with Desiree Zamorano, who's with the same press, who wrote a book called Dispossessed, which very relevant now, which she was not expecting, and it breaks her heart that it is. Follows a man named Manuel through LA history, and it's a beautiful story. It's a very rich family story, so it feels a bit like Alterations in that way. But it goes through the 2 mass deportations of Mexican Americans in the 1930s and aptly, horribly named Operation Wetback in the 1960s. 200,000 citizens were repatriated to Mexico. Some of them did not even speak Spanish. It was absurd. So her book and mine are sort of in conversation, and mine is obviously a bit, subtler, just living, being gay in the 30s and 40s. So sort of going forward, I feel like I love the idea of books in conversation with each other, and I think I'm going to keep pursuing that. But anyway, yes, it feels great.
Yeah, have that occasionally with either back-to-back episodes or just ones that, within recent months seem to be, these are guests who have no relationship to each other, but somehow these works, at least they're hitting me through some sort of nexus, and there seems to be these connections as we go on. So that's the advantage of having a reading life, I guess. So,
and it's and a writing life. It's way more interesting to have to be in conversation with other writers about something than just plugging the one piece. Yeah.
So did you revisit or rewrite over the years?
Yeah, so I rewrote this a whole bunch in the beginning. I did a mid-submission rewrite to tighten it up. And then when it got accepted, I was like, holy cow, that's terrifying. I haven't looked at this in 6 years. And so I looked at it, and it turned out it was really pretty tight. I had learned a few things about verbs. So I fixed a lot on the sentence levels, because as you write more, you learn more. And so I went in that way. There was no elaborate restructuring. I did layer in some stuff because I felt like, God, poor Lizzie. She's like the only mixed race human in her life involved. So I changed the character a little bit in her background so they'd have more in common. And so there was a tiny bit of layering. And then I did an edit with Amy Hardy, who oddly enough is a horror writer. Through Running Wild, and her edit, she gave me that opening paragraph about alterations that loops around in the end to sort of tighten it up. But for the most part, it was not hugely rewritten. I was really happy when I read it because I was like, oh my gosh, I've written like 3 books since then. I should know something, and it turns out it was actually only the verbs that I had to change. Too many words around the verbs.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I always figure if I ever really, really write, at some point, some editor is going to get on my ass with, Gil, you actually have been way too influenced by Alan Moore when you were 14 years old, and you need to stop with these sentence structures with the 3, the 3 examples. Yeah, there are things that I unfortunately...
Oh, we all have our tics.
Yeah, which I just someday need to get past. But, tell me about the film experience, your Hollywood experience, how it informs Alterations, and what differs from the book is set in the late 90s, and then has a sort of revisit right around the time you were finishing the novel, it seems.
And the late 90s happened because I needed the age to work for Adriana being older, but I happened to be in Hollywood then. And so Laura's personality comes from another place, but the experiences that she has there definitely are very close to home. There are things that have changed so much, and we don't realize when we're at an awesome thing that may not continue.
Perpetually. The golden age is always...
So we call it... I call it now the gay 90s, because they were saying the gay 90s about the 1890s, where just people were so flush with money and everything. So when Hollywood was flush with money was when I was working there, and Universal gave an enormous party on their backlot for Christmas. And Co and I went, and the trolley took you down, and there was... Anyway, you can read the description in the book. So I was like, all right, that has to be in there. But also, when I was working as an executive in the 90s there, I worked for Sylvester Stallone's company, for John Peters' company. I noticed there were a lot of women who would work in the industry, and then they would become part of a power couple with someone who was at their level as an executive. And then, of course, because it was the 90s, the man's career would soar. and they would kind of disappear, so I was sort of channeling that.
I go back to The Player, which is early 90s with Altman, where you get the same thing with Robbins and the woman from Home for the Holidays, Steve Guttenberg's wife.
Oh, she's so great.
I'm blanking out her name now. Bonnie is the character's name, and I've seen her in a whole bunch of things. But yeah, same thing with the two of them are together, and he just
soars. Yeah, and she ends up supporting. So I sort of went that. Well, obviously, Laura had to be set on a path that got her to Baltimore. Yeah. But I did want to sort of showcase that. And I think also Laura overall she was raised on romantic comedies, and she was raised to believe that finding a partner is what you're after, finding the guy. And every time she pursues that, it kind of puts her life sideways or takes her off track of her own desire and will. So it's sort of a pattern. And also in the 90s, like there was definitely glass ceiling for women. Not that there isn't now, but when I was interviewing for jobs after working at Sly's company, and I had 9 interviews to be a creative executive at Warner Brothers, but I did not get the slot, and a fella did. And I was talking to my friend Ralph, who is black, and he's like, "That's why they call it a glass ceiling, Kate. It's because you can't see it." And I was like, "Oh," because I was actually having a conversation with Tananarive about that. She was raised by civil rights activists, and so she was raised in the belief that everything had been solved. I was raised by a woman who blazed a trail through the newspaper business and all this stuff. So I believe that like women had been solved and we were actually in really oppressive systems. And so that was another sort of waking up. But yeah, so the 90s, it was sort of fun to go back there. And I also, I have a friend who worked for, 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
No idea who made it.
Yeah, anyway, English... an English company at the time who was Working Title. Yeah, she worked for Working Title, and they moved back to London. And I was a little covetous of that relationship, but I was early established, and I was living with. It wasn't a sacrifice. It's not like I had that opportunity, but I thought that was very easy to use for Laura's.
Road not taken
problem. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of it was borrowed, and so it's definitely you feel like. You're there. Like that's, I think, legit how it is to be in film then. And the 30s and 40s I just drew from the books. Yeah.
You're at least adjacent to Hollywood in the 20 years since then. I'm sure you've got enough, people within the world. How badly has it changed? Or I just finished watching The Studio on Apple TV, but which is its own, goofy thing.
I'm not a fan of the pessimism of that. Actually, I do have to say I only watched the first episode, but there are
funny moments, but it's too.
It was very. It seemed very. Ungrateful and angry. So there is definitely, so you have to know that, so the other book that came out opposite this was me taking all of The Collective, which was published by Writ Large Press, was me taking all of my Hollywood years and my feelings about morality level and things like that and putting it into a horror novel and creating a narcissistic producer who, instead of narcissism,
I'm just kidding. Go on.
Right. Well, no, because they're lovely.
I know, I'm kidding. I have no experience in this world, just media exposure.
But a narcissistic producer, but, he's a demon. It was an easy way to do it. Anyway, that's a whole thing. But, I think everything is always changing. What I do like now is since there is streaming, well, first off, in the 90s, there was a lot of really bad behavior that was excused and forgiven. And people behaving outrageously gave them cachet. So there were all these tales of Scott Rudin eviscerating his assistant that would go around salaciously. Yeah. That stopped being tolerated. So there's a lot less of that. I was around when my boss warned me not to be alone with Harvey Weinstein. That has changed. Yeah. So it's a lot more civilized. I have a friend who's a producer, and he said that people are way more civilized. The culture isn't the same. So that's why it was also fun to capture that era. And now, because of streaming and because people can also shoot films for cheaply, I think we're getting a lot more excellent material. It's just that the studios are not necessarily the ones putting it out. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't, regret leaving. I'm so much happier in the fiction world and in the teaching world, and everything just feels better. And I'm glad I was there when I was. My boss married the president of production at Warner Brothers, And we went to their wedding, which was tantamount to going to Lombard and Gable's wedding. I mean, it was Matthew McConaughey punched out the wedding photographer because he thought they were, that day's equivalent of TMZ. And there were hundreds of people in this giant tent on John Peters' back lawn. And everybody was sort of kissing each other's butt, and it was like the Seven Circles of Hell. And aside from two friends, the only people of color there were a 200-person gospel choir who had been brought in, And so I looked around and I was like, I'm really glad I was here. I saw this. All of the stars of that year were there. It's time to get out. So I definitely had my full time there. And I don't begrudge it at all, but I'm happy to be out.
Baltimore,
I know, right? I have no idea.
Of all places. I went to school in Annapolis, so Baltimore was our closest, hip city in the early 90s.
I love Baltimore, and I lived in D.C. for a while, and I went up there, and it seemed like there was such a beautiful scene of artists and writers and musicians and people just hanging out, and it was just very casual and lovely. How they ended up there was just the characters went there. I'm definitely more a headlights writer, so that it's E.L. Doctorow's idea that you're driving in the fog with the headlights on. You can see the road just in front of you. You know the rest of the road is there, but you have to discover it yet. So that they went to Baltimore, and I knew Baltimore pretty well. There is a cicadas scene because I did go to Baltimore to visit friends at a time that it was all of the
cycle. Yeah.
The cycle, yeah. And
so we have 17-year. I didn't know the 7-year one you've mentioned, but
right.
Yeah.
And I could have been incorrect. I should have researched that.
I should have corrected. I apologize.
But yeah,
Jill found a mistake.
We were wiping the windshield wipers to get them off and crunching through them. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. But it was really nice to go there, and I did have enough Baltimore friends that I could, do a bit of research and stuff. It was interesting though, because Baltimore is really a multicultural city. But I knew that Nonna, being Italian, was not going to be her world. Was not going to be very multicultural. Yeah. So Lizzie goes into a completely white world. Lizzie is Hapa. She's half Japanese and half white. So, it's kind of like I feel like I didn't honor Baltimore properly, but I did give a realistic interpretation of what it was like for Nonna and these folks.
Again, same thing. You're not doing a pat, let's cover the entirety of this world and make everything wonderful and a melting pot. This is,
this is their world.
The nature of it is that it's so confined and constricted for them. So, kudos for not, trying to violate the character
itself. And it does
itself.
Feel very odd also because I know a lot of the history of Los Angeles, during that period, but I also know that Adriana, when she moved to LA and was working in film, would really mostly be encountering white folks. So,
that there wasn't those even opportunities to make a wrong turn somewhere and end up in a neighborhood and,
Yeah.
So what has teaching taught you?
Oh gosh, everything. My students teach me every day.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful I'm in adjunct, so I'm really grateful when I get a class.
Whenever you have work, yeah.
And when I do get that class, I just assume I have the right students in front of me. And what really blew my mind was I started teaching at California State Summer School for the Arts, which is teenagers. 60% of them are fully funded. So they're from all over California, and the writing coming out of them is so fresh and original and interesting. And once you get them doing prompts and sort of getting out of their ideas of writing like other people, it just blows my mind what comes out of them. And that ends up being the most inspirational thing ever. The poetry coming out of my friend Chi-Wan Choi's class is, I feel like that generation that we taught last year is probably going to heal us from everything that's going on. They are working through the lockdown now in a way that I think our age group cannot even fathom. So I really do love teaching writing. It does give me hope. And I have such phenomenal students at Cal State LA, mostly first generation students. And I have to...
Is it first gen American or first one's getting the level of education?
First one getting education.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to, they say decolonize your syllabus. I have to actually decolonize them a little bit because of some of the stuff they've been taught. So and I do it with genre writing. Oh. So I basically use the Locus reading list every year so we have fresh stories to look at, and I try to get a bigger variety from them. And it blows their minds in the most beautiful way, because they've been reading a lot of only 20th century, 19th century, 18th century English literature. And they feel empowered, but they're like, oh, wait, people who look like me are writing, because even though I know their teachers don't believe that, what they're taught has been subconsciously telling them that.
Yeah.
And so their stories are just phenomenal, and it's really fun to see what they come up with. So once like I spend like 4 weeks getting them on their own feet and their brains, what comes out of it is really delightful. So
optimism among kids, given that from my perspective, it's a fallen world, it's only getting worse, blah, blah, blah. You're dealing with teenagers. Do they see their lives ahead of them? How are, just from at least from the little experience you get?
Yeah, it's interesting. I try not to pry, because it really, really was, the lockdown was incredibly hard on so many of them. A lot of people lost family. And also, the way things are going in the country, I haven't done that kind of inquiry on them. I only approach them through their writing, also because I feel like I'd be laying my 20th century notions on them. Sure.
I just don't know how much of it is evinced in the writing.
Yeah, I hope the writing is hopeful, and it is forward-thinking, and so I hope that, they find themselves in that. But I think they're also way more practical than we were at that age. And a lot of times when they're pursuing education, it's with a specific career in mind, whereas which makes me sad, because I loved that we had 4 years to kind of screw around and figure out what we wanted out of life in our education. But just more down to earth. I think they're way more together, some of them at 16, 17, and then definitely my college students, because of their monetary background, are also working jobs while they're putting themselves through school. I sometimes get more students in their mid to late 20s. Some of them are in their 30s. I do get some just out of high school who've been a little sheltered, but very few. And I don't know. I mean, I wish a better world for them, but I do believe that they are going to have the tools that it takes to get through, which is different. My daughter went for a very highfalutin school, and I think a lot of her friends are floundering, but she's got her feet on the ground.
Having you and co as parents, you know.
Yeah. Well, and also we made them get jobs really early, because we're mean like that.
I figure, probably would have helped me a good deal more than, don't worry, Gil, just go figure yourself out at Hampshire College, of all places. Which, again, as I've said, I may be the only Hampshire grad who can say he's a pharmaceutical industry lobbyist, but go on. Yeah.
My friend Richard Rushfield wrote a memoir called "Don't Follow Me, I'm Lost," because of
that whole Amherst, Northampton area, that vibe, especially early 90s as we were at, was quite a time. And well, there were a lot of ambiguities about it and things that have sort of permeated into the culture and other things that are reacting strongly against that. But, it's it was certainly an education of sorts. But I
try to give my students hope, and I try not to put any of my own negative garbage on them. Because they're going to have quite a world to navigate. Yeah. I do get a little pushy on some of them when they are being a little clueless and just like, no, you need to, stand up for yourself. And so, try to give them a little more agency in their own life. And to my freshmen, teaching them to find their own voices in what they're saying and stand up for what they're saying, I hope will give them an advantage as they go out there.
You mentioned on your Substack recently that you were having trouble journaling or writing nonfiction. Still happening? And how do you diagnose what it is? I know it's this whole world that we're dealing with. But
my last Substack, I was so declarative, and I was like, I will document this. But every time I sit down to journal, I tend to go negative. And I did have this problem in my 20s. It's not just the times. So not negative, but just get into the sad mode, and things get sadder, and it does not help me to have written it.
Do you know, if you actually read my journals, you would have no idea what year or time anything was happening. They're all dated, but almost nothing refers to the outside world.
Oh, really?
I mean, it refers to my world, but not like the election and everything else. It's one of those, I guess I could be writing about that too, but whatever. The
last time things were miserable, which...
Did it ever stop?
In comparison, it's very funny. In comparison, our hashtag resist in 2017 seems quaint now. I was having a rough summer. I did write an essay about that. It's on my website. can't remember the title, but you'll find it. Anyway, my mother had been diagnosed with brain cancer and she was dying. I was also working with Writ Large Projects, and I think we had talked about it in a prior podcast, and they were doing 90 days of literary events in LA. I started just documenting the events and documenting the poetry that people, and sort of at that point, I think I just took up doing that all the time. So if I go to an event, I will photograph it. I will try to summarize what's being talked about and things like that. And that is something, you know, I do it on Instagram. I do want to do it in journaling, keeping track of the artists and writers and what they're doing and how they're thinking about things, in a variety of different artists and writers. So during the Muslim ban, there was an Eid reading, which was really beautiful. And people spoke before that. And there's like always so much joy in any people when there's garbage going on. So it was a wild capturing of joy and worry and things like that. So I feel like that's where I'm trying to journal now. And not about my own self, because, you know, that just goes down a spiral every time.
Okay, I see your argument, then I understand.
I'm a very upbeat person in person, but somehow when I get on the page, you know, so I think that's why I write fiction. But yeah, it is hard now, and it's hard to try to summarize, but I feel like we do need to document these incredible times. You know, the senator of California was handcuffed because of asking a question. I think we need to document this, and I know the news is doing it. So I was trying to think of my lens and where I am in the world and what would be valuable. And what was nice is that with 90 by 90, we did it in 2014, 2017. I did a lot of documenting of that, and it turned out it wasn't being massively documented in one place. So I wrote an article each time. I did not intend that. The second one is about losing my mother at the same time as this marvelous thing was going on.
When it comes to journaling, online or handwritten?
Handwritten. Yeah.
That's my morning practice, is the after the morning coffee, which follows the morning exercise routine. One chapter or whatever book I'm right now, it's Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities, and then the journal, and then the daily postcard, which you're occasionally a recipient of.
I love that.
But yeah, just the handwriting thing.
Yeah, I also am not a daily person, so I'll probably write a session after the oddness of being at a really wonderful.
Would you have to fill me in on? Tell me about StokerCon.
I was laughing that I am not promoting my horror novel in this conversation where I'm at the horror convention, but I'm so comfortable in the horror world, and also I do believe that your listeners would really dig alteration. So. So we're at StokerCon in Stanford. The day that I left, I had friends demonstrating, peaceful demonstrations, beautiful, hilarious demonstrations. Not hilarious, but just like joyful. Yeah. There's a lot of like dancing. There's a band, Las Cafeteras, which is my friend Orocio's sister's band. They're down playing music in Grant Park. People are just sort of occupying our downtown as the person in charge of the country, whose name I just do not utter anymore, has sent the National Guard. And so it started with a demonstration around ICE had done a raid and taken a bunch of people captive, and there was a demonstration around that building of only 150, 300 people. It was a peaceful demonstration. There was trying to stand in the way and get in the way of, and I have done that too, physically getting in the way of this illegal operation. So understanding that ICE does have the right to deport people with a criminal record whose papers are expired, but what they are doing here is rounding people up, not checking any kind of ID, and detaining them so that each person has to get out with the help of a lawyer, which they may not have access to, with money. And so it basically illegal rounding up has been going on. Over 300 people have been taken now. And this is in our home city, which is it's always been multicultural. It was multicultural before most white people got there. It was, Japanese, Chinese, Mexicali, and indigenous. There's a lot of Tongva people still in LA, and they're specifically rounding up people who are brown without asking questions. So the National Guard was sent in illegally, and then he sent in Marines against our own people. I have to let you know, these demonstrations, although it's been talked about otherwise, are completely peaceful. So anyway, hard to leave town. Yeah. Came to Stanford to see all of my marvelous horror writer friends, but also carrying this checking the news thing. And I just saw a photo. I don't understand what the photos will do to me, but I just saw a photo of this space in Little Tokyo being occupied, where we go every New Year's to celebrate Oshogatsu, the New Year festival. So it's been very hard, but it's also been really intense, wonderful conversations about genre. Again, compartmentalizing is really useful. So I believe that I'll go home and write about all of this. And I do believe that people in arts in our marvelously diverse community, and everybody's obviously upset, so you try to talk about other things to keep a positive, joyful space talking about art despite everything that's going on. And so we will see what happens today, which is no King's Day. So anyway, yeah.
Are you sort of an ambassador for LA here? Are people asking how things are? Do you feel like you do have to talk about it with some people just because they're wondering what it's like on the ground, I guess?
Yeah, I do, because people are like, are you okay there? And I'm like, well, it's actually only 1 square mile, and we are a vast, wonderfully diverse city. And
it's in Santa Monica, which is right nearby.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm in Glendale, which is just the opposite. If you know where the Hollywood sign is, we're on the opposite side of the mountain of that. But so... Yeah, and they say, are you okay? And it's such a loaded question, right? And I'm like, no, my family is safe, and my friends are out there in the streets, which is beautiful. But the ambassador part is more, I was doing a reading from The Collective here, because that is my horror novel. And
you make me feel bad about not having read it.
No, not at all. I'm so happy to talk about alterations because I love it so much. But I was going to read a spooky section, because you try to read the horror thing. I actually read where a character is walking through downtown LA after some tacos, and he is... contemplating sort of larger ecosystems, and when he gets to his taco stand, it's gone. So it's a little bit of gentrification, but also the ecosystem of this cult that he sort of belongs to. And it was nice to visit LA to the group of people who came, and sort of, but I haven't been, talking. I probably, it's like I do. Am I talking too much about it? But
you did mention having too much coffee this morning.
Yes, so. I did have too much coffee. But yeah, so overall I'm keeping it to horror, but I do let people know that I'm, not doing great,
But able to write, like you said, able to start writing through this, or is it still in the processing?
Oh, I just don't write at conventions, because it's all, I put all that energy into conversation.
Yeah, and getting stuck with some schlub from New Jersey like me.
Oh, no, I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah, how's the East Coast change for you? How's the coming back?
It is wild coming back. So I'm in Stamford, and I thought it would be easy to go to the hometown. I grew up in Middletown. But it is wild. I walked to lunch yesterday with my friend M.M. Olivas, who's an amazing writer. And we walked over, a patch of water, a very rusty bridge, and the smell of creosote from the railroad ties, and the water, and the sense memories are flooding like crazy. So... yeah.
See, you should be like me and stay in the same house your entire life. It really just restricts everything.
That must do a number on you.
Yeah, it's pretty weird, to be honest. But, somehow I've managed to keep this going the whole time. But next book?
Yeah. So because of having 2 books come out, I've been working only on shorter things. I am working with L.P. Kindred, who's a marvelous writer, Ignite Award-winning writer. We met at 2 cons ago. I love cons for this kind of magic. Actually, we met 3 cons ago, but last year we ended up going to the Stokers followed by the Nebulas in the same 2 weekends, and we somehow became besties and have started writing a book about genre writing novellas. So it's going to be a craft book. And we started it as an epistolary exchange because it seems that all the books about novellas out there are very prescriptive. And what we found is novellas can be anything. My friend Marie Wood, who you just met downstairs, wrote this amazing novella in the novella series of Raw Dog Screaming Press, edited by R.J. Jackson Joseph, called 12 Hours, and it's like this incredible, it's basically like a really tight interior monologue that sucks you in and then you rush through it. So it opens itself up to all kinds of formats. So we're doing that. As far as a novel goes, I do have one that it's going to be a horror novel, and I'm looking at different kinds of hauntings, and I'm dealing with losing a friend like 20 years ago, but in a different ghosty form. And the main character is Noemi. It'll be interesting. I'm not sure what it is. It's a mess. And I'm just going to go, after I'm kind of through the promotion period and doing other stuff, I'm going to kind of try to do a deep dive this fall and see how that goes.
Do you have a writing practice? Or is it really kind of determined by the sort of project that you're working on?
I do. For the longest time, I was sitting down 3 times a week for 3 hours, and that was like a steady thing. Because the everyday model does not work when you have jobs. But now I have
kids
found
when you were child rearing also.
I was raising kids and 3 jobs. So that was how I sectioned it out. I do need to find a new method of practice now. I do dip in when I can. But when you're teaching fiction and you have 600 pages come in from your students altogether, because I'm teaching 20 people at once because it's Cal State LA, that gets derailed a bit. So now it seems to be when I can find the time, I sit down and I work on stuff. As far as a novel goes, I will probably get back into the 3 hours 3 times a week, because novels need that deep. In the meantime, I've just been diving into a short story, reading where I am. And this novella that I'm working on, because we're trying to go a little meta on the novella book. So that one is science fiction in the world of the ones that I publish with Analog and Asimov's. A couple of things. And I hope that I would love to get back into a novel, because I do love that deep state where you're with all the characters. When I sent Alterations out to market the first time, I really went into mourning for the characters. Yeah. You really sort of miss them. So I'd like to get there with the next book.
We started with you talking about malls. As, again, someone who spends his entire life in northern New Jersey, such that malls are in my DNA. And in fact, I still have dreams about malls that don't exist.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm like Italo Calvino with this thing. I have invisible malls. I've visited my entire freaking life. How's your mall relationship changed, I guess?
Oh, my goodness, yeah. So in LA, we have malls, but we also have mini malls. So mini mall was more what I was going at with that. And the mini mall is amazing because you have some chains at the time. Obviously, this is dated. Blockbuster was one. Supercuts is still existent. But you would also have like a phenomenal restaurant in LA because it's cheaper to rent there. Yeah. Your best eating is usually in a mini mall.
Oh, one of the best Thai places in the world. Don't know if it's still there. Vegas. Mini mall. Junkiest stores around, and one of the greatest Thai restaurants in at least in America.
It's incredible. You get the most phenomenal sushi done by a top star chef in a mini mall. Yeah, so I do love mini malls. I actually shopping malls give me the screaming mimes. There's just too much noise and activity. I'll go once in a while. My husband used to go just for the fun of Black Friday to see all the people going around, and he wasn't like shopping. It was just to see the people. And I found that's a little too much for my senses, but yeah.
I had a friend we took to Comic-Con in San Diego back in 2005, I think, and he was a Navy guy who was part of the Aegis defense system in a carrier group. So he was used to tracking hundreds and hundreds of different bogies at the same time to figure out what was friendly, what wasn't, and totally overwhelmed by Comic-Con. He just, I can't process everything, Gil. I'm like, you ran an Aegis defense system and you can't handle a bunch of people in costumes? But yes, apparently.
I believe it because I was on a panel about Shirley Jackson at Comic-Con, which was packed with like 500 people. It was beautiful. Yeah. But yeah, the conference I've definitely enjoyed, and my husband was backseat driving because he's like, "You've got to go to the booths and take the photos," and I was like, I didn't know how to Comic-Con. Fortunately, I ran into a friend who is very familiar with it, and so he got me to do the right things. Nice. It's enjoyable, but I really would absolutely go back and get invited, but on purpose, I don't know.
No, I get you.
It's a lot.
You know the big question I always ask. And you've got a few books on your table over there. What are you reading?
Oh, my goodness. That's a really good question. Oh. At a conference, as you know, your brain goes right out the window.
What did you take with you for the trip?
Right. So...
alternately, what did you pick up here that you're interested in? But I want to know
I'm
what
really
you've been up
excited.
to
I got
lately.
the new Chuck Tingle was given to me. I also got 2 new novellas in the Raw Dog Screaming Press line that I'm in because I'm excited to read them. One by Eliza Broadbent, who's just absolutely one of the best humans and a really good writer. She wrote a novella called Inkvine that I blurbed, and she blurbed my my horror novel. But it's so funny. I was trying to... I just got out of so while I teach, I tend to do audiobooks because in reading, I go into critical brain and it takes me a minute to step back from that. So in the summer, all I do is read. My last audiobook was The Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, which was absolutely immersive and wonderful. And I love that she was doing like 5 things with the book. It was also very absorbing. So that was the most recent one. But yeah, it's very funny. I always get asked that question, what is your favorite influencer book, or kind of like that? And I always have to say it's what I read last week, you know, because there are things that sort of become ingrained in us that we've read over and over. I was talking to Erin Dries about the Oz books because they absolutely made me as a person. And they are horror. They are absolutely terrifying. And it turned out it has influenced him too. We're going to pitch a panel next time about that. But when people ask me about, like, you know, the classic books and I know that your college definitely steeped you in that. I'm always at a bit of a loss because it usually is the last thing I've read.
No, you can just make stuff up. That's always my... that's a funny thing. Yeah, you guys all think I know all this stuff only because I mentioned Robert Musil, who nobody else has read. I sound like I'm that much smarter, but really...
But it was St. John's had you read, like, very specific...
Yeah, and that was part of last week's show with David Denby. We really talked about some of the books that you get turned on to, and some of the, as I had the previous week when having a podcast about the poet Horace, the political agendas of some of those great books programs is also tied into a certain set of parameters
right? Yeah.
And it was one of those, I knew it was very Athens centric as opposed to Roman, didn't quite know why, and now I thanks to Peter Stoddard, have a greater understanding of
but I find it so interesting too when you and I think it's because I switched to being an American Studies major, that when you find the social context to when something was written, you get a lot of information. You're like, oh no, they're talking about something else entirely here. You know, yeah.
There's an agenda behind everything, as we know, and you know. We get our modern contemporary novels that are an absolute joy, like this one. So, you know, do you see yourself revisiting the characters at all?
Oh goodness, I'm not a sequel person.
I know, but you know,
but I do love reading from that book. I read A Scene with Adriana and Rose, and the audiobook actually is really marvelous. I got to listen to different auditions, and I found someone who got Lizzie right, because there were some people who got the back in time right, but they couldn't do a teenager, and so she sounded very formal, and it wasn't going to work. But when
I've got the girl from the Great North, that cartoon on Fox in my head now. Sorry.
So I found someone who could do both, and she was brilliant. But I do a voice on Rose that Tony Ann Johnson was like, it doesn't sound like Rose. Because I definitely... So I enjoy reading the back in time stuff, and it's got a little bit of that sort of back and forth dialogue inspired by the movies of that period, too, because the dialogue was crackerjack. So I feel like the characters will always live with me. I didn't understand how much joy I'd get from going back into the book those 6 years after I'd read it. And I was like, oh, it's really fun to read from.
So as opposed to great influential book, great influential movie for you?
Oh gosh, that's the same question. I did study film.
I thought you'd jump out with a Philadelphia story or something.
I'm going to have to say for this past decade, well, first off, Sinners. Everyone.
I haven't seen it yet. I know I'm supposed to. I know. We're going to go.
It will not. Yeah, it's shot so dark that you will miss stuff. If you go, you'll see it on the small screen later. Yeah. But I went twice. There's so much in that movie, and we could have a larger conversation about how people are saying, but it's not horror, because they cannot say that they like horror, because that would somehow incriminate them.
It's just the same genre ghetto thing we've dealt with for friggin' decades.
Goodness. And I tell them, I had to tell a friend who's amazing about stuff. I said, well, when they've got blood dripping from their neck and they're vampires, I believe we are in the horror genre. Anyway,
but no, it's more of a social commentary about race and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
and it transcends genre. It's always the ways of
transcending genre makes me want to hurl.
Yeah, instead of just saying, I really enjoyed this movie. I really enjoyed this horror movie. I enjoyed
this movie. You actually don't have to say that sentence. You can just say, I enjoyed this. Anyway, but Everything Everywhere All at Once blew my mind. So what I love is that, I know there's a lot of not so great stuff being put out and stuff that's very derivative and stuff, but there is some really brilliant, deeply written movies that are coming out, and that's really exciting.
Sturgeon's Law, you can go back go back to the auteur era. They weren't all winners,
Oh no,
90% of stuff was crap back then too.
Yeah, and also I think it was Darby O'Gill and the Little People had come out at the same time as some of the early auteur stuff. So you're always going to get some garbage, but I'm really happy that there are people out there thinking incredibly deeply and writing stuff. And Everything Everywhere I've watched 3 or 4 times now. It's just a place of joy that everything is unexpected in it. And Sinners too. It honors tropes, but then it takes you somewhere that you do not expect to be.
Maybe that'll be my afternoon when I get back from Stanford. So, Kate, thanks so much for coming on. And do you have a panel after this? Or you back on?
No, I have a joyfully panel-free StokerCon, weirdly joyfully. I did a reading yesterday, but the other panels were online. So I basically just wander the lobby, pick up friends, and
go schmooze.
See where I go.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And that was Kate Maruyama. Go Get Alterations. It's out now from Running Wild Press. The Collective sounds like a lot of fun too, but I haven't checked that one out yet. And you can follow Kate at her site, kate-maruyama.squarespace.com. That's KATE-MARUYAMA.squarespace.com. That's got links to her books, interviews, essays, and more. And she's also on Instagram as Kate Maruyama, all one word, and on Blue Sky as katemaru.bsky.social. But I'll have links to all that in the show and episode notes for this one. Thanks for listening to the Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. There's no better way to build an audience than through word of mouth. Also, visit Apple's podcast page for us and leave a rating and review. Every little bit helps, You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long. It'll cut you off after that, so call back and leave another message if you do. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with our listeners, but I'd never run someone's message without their permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, I appreciate it, but don't give it to me. I've got a day job that pays the bills. You should give to individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, all those crowdfunding platforms, where you'll find people who really need help just trying to make ends meet or get an artistic project going, covering medical bills or car payments or veterinary bills, and just a few dollars from you might make a real difference in their lives. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, but there are a lot of other things you can give to. The Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice. There's a lot of things you can do with your money to try to help build a better world, so I hope you'll give. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can visit my archives at vmspod.com to check out my 2018 conversation with Hal, where you can learn more about his art, his music, and more. And you can follow Hal on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download all our past episodes at Apple Podcasts and other podcast sources. And you can find all my episodes and sign up for the Virtual Memories Show newsletter at vmspod.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram and YouTube as vmspod. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.